Today we're going to prepare data for reports. This is a pretty generic module. Task is to prepare data on supplier diversity for reports to stakeholders or regulatory agencies. So a stakeholder assessment, it's important to keep stakeholders informed of a company's supplier diversity initiatives. Ensure key performance indicators align to the requirements of internal stakeholders and all documented requirements of external stakeholders and regulatory agencies. And tables are often used to display the requirements and goals along with actual performance by a defined time period. This provides comprehensive assessment that is clear and concise to all stakeholders. So stakeholder theories is a little bit about stakeholders, a little late in the game, but cover this, okay? A few different theories about stakeholders. You have traditional input-output model, and the company converts inputs of investors, money, employees, and suppliers into saleable outputs which customers buy, thereby returning capital to the company. This is called the resource-based model for stakeholder theories. So using this model, companies only address issues concerning investors, employees, suppliers, and customers. Customers isn't really an internal stakeholder, but all the rest are. So that's the traditional input-output model. Then you have the traditional shareholder view of stakeholders, also known as shareholders. And they are the owners of the company, and the company puts their needs first with the goal of increasing value for them. This is also known as the market-based view. This is what you hear a lot about on Wall Street. The only one to pay attention to in this view is the shareholder. And then you've got the stakeholder view, which integrates both the resource-based view from 1, as well as the market-based view from 2, and recognizes that there are other parties involved and affected by decisions of the company, such as government, political groups, trade association, unions, communities for sure, and the public at large, depending on the product or service. A corporate stakeholder then is the party who affects or can be affected by the organization's actions. That's a pretty broad definition, but it catches everybody. Communication techniques. So supply management professionals must be able to identify any other people that could be stakeholders, may have an interest in the supplier diversity program, be affected by the program, be able to influence the program. Once all the stakeholders have been identified, the supply management professional must define the best way to communicate with them. So here's a model. It's used to identify and align stakeholder groups with the project objectives or supplier diversity program objectives. So first step here is to identify the stakeholder groups. Clarify the objectives of the supplier diversity program, identify the implied changes in processes and determine the necessary behavioral change required to support these changes, and identify the necessary resources to carry out the change program. This is after identifying the stakeholder groups and then quizzing them. Next, you evaluate the performance of the stakeholder groups. Estimate the impact of each stakeholder group on the project's success. How important are they to the project? How much can they affect the project? What relevant resources does each stakeholder influence? How does the stakeholder influence these resources? And what authority does the stakeholder have in the influence? So that's step 2, evaluating importance of each stakeholder group that you identified, step 1. So step 3, evaluate the relationships of the stakeholder groups to the supplier diversity program. Assess the relationship between the identified stakeholder groups. So you're looking at the stakeholder groups amongst each of them and how they work with each other and how they view the supplier diversity program. So assess the relationships. Who has positive influence on others? Which individuals tend to be at odds with the group? Which relationships are strong, weak, or just lacking? That's step 3. Evaluate the relationships. And step 4 is evaluate levels of alignment and involvement with the supplier diversity program. So determine the stakeholder group's alignment and involvement with the change program. Get the stakeholder groups aligned with the supplier diversity program. This involves a 4-step process of alignment. So first process is define the alignment of or define the outcome of the stakeholder alignment. So start with the outcome you're looking for from the stakeholder group. Then you develop a strategy to get to that outcome, and you implement the strategy, and then you track results and follow up the actions. So it all start at the end first and then work backwards. Project team assigns team members to each stakeholder group. Define all stakeholders' purpose in the project, who needs to make it happen, who needs to let it happen, who needs information only. Has handling all stakeholders been identified, and how do you align the different groups with the change process? And then identify stakeholders' contribution to project outcome. Ensures the right relationships are developed and stakeholders are heard. Avoids unexpected project delays due to dissension, and allows planning of intervention activities to manage roadblocks. So intended use of data. Organizations frequently develop metrics for measuring their progress implementing diverse supplier initiatives. Results are reported internally, but may also be reported to customers in the community, as well as being made available to the general public. Just depends on your program. Definitions of a diverse supplier. So there is a definition from the Small Business Association, SBA. Supplier is considered a small business if its size is consistent with the government standards. So I guess this is from the Federal Acquisition Regulations, 19.102. Depending on the industry, the qualification for a small business is based either on the number of employees or the average annual receipts. So in manufacturing, a small business is 500 employees or less. That's the manufacturing industries. For transportation, agriculture, and construction, it's measured on money. So 500,000 to 100 million average annual revenue is a small business. So under 100 million, basically, average annual revenue for transportation, agriculture, and construction. Small business disadvantaged. This is done by the SBA. Small disadvantaged business qualifies as a small business, and it's got to be at least 51% owned, controlled by an individual, is categorized as socially and economically disadvantaged, as defined by the federal government. So you can use these federal government definitions, or you can modify them, or go to any number of nonprofits that we've discussed and get their definitions. The owner's net worth, excluding their equity and their business, cannot exceed $750,000 to be a small disadvantaged business. So the government definition of diverse, the North American Industry Classification System, otherwise known as NAICS, is used by the government to classify business by type, but does not classify business as small or large or diverse. It just kind of classifies it by industry. The SBA has developed standards for each NAICS category. So you can look them up on the SBA's website as to what a small business is based on each industry, but it seems like a pretty detailed way to go about it. Non-government definition of diverse. So non-governmental organizations may adopt third-party definitions of diverse suppliers. For example, the NMSDC, which is a nonprofit, National Minority Supplier Development Council, has defined a minority-controlled enterprise when a minority principal owns at least 30%, control of the enterprise's daily operation, retains no less than 51% of voting equity. So you can use these guys' definitions, or you can mix them with the government, depending on what you want to do. Moving beyond the context of the letter of the law to a broader philosophy of diverse suppliers to include a supplier diversity program is often considered the best practice. Domestic and international regulatory requirements. U.S. federal requirements, government requirements for supplier diversity are laid out in subchapter D, Socioeconomic Programs, Part 19. of the FAR, or Federal Acquisition Regulation. U.S. federal subcontracting, companies supplying more than $150,000 annually on an individual contract must have a subcontracting plan that will include diverse suppliers. So some of the requirements from the FAR for subcontracting plan are individual subcontract report twice a year, March 31st and September 30th, regardless of whether there's been any activity. So if you've got a contract, you've got to submit this report to the federal government. It's got to be submitted within 30 days after the contract completion also. And then there's the summary subcontract report, submitted semi-annual, the same as the individual subcontract report. State and local requirements. Some jurisdictions have supplier diversity reporting requirements that are like the federal government subcontracting plans and summary reports. Probably a lot of them model them after the federal government. Publicly traded company requirements. Publicly traded companies must keep records to satisfy SOX and other regulations. It's usually done by your finance team. Internal considerations. Companies may be mandated to maintain a certain level of content by certain countries or pay higher taxes. So local requirements. Since many diverse suppliers are small businesses, they often focus their efforts on marketing at the local or regional level. And often the customer base will dictate local diverse supplier sourcing. Demographics by geographic location also play a role in diverse sourcing. It's best to identify regional certification boards to ensure that supplier diversity program goals are met. And the supply management organization may be mandated to maintain a certain level of local content. All right. Which of the following elements is not appropriate to include within a performance plan report to top management? Ethics policy. I don't know. Headcount. Performance plan, that's going to be in there. Savings plan, that's going to be in there. Training, yeah, I'd say the one that's not is ethics. Not that you wouldn't have them, but just wouldn't report it in performance plan. Come on. All right. Yep. A. And I got one more here. If the supply management organization were trying to determine the response level of its customers in terms of its supply diversity, which application would be least useful? We've got supply management trying to determine the response level of its customers. How will they respond to supplier diversity, I think is what it's asking. Measuring change in internal and external diversity responsiveness. Maybe develop a long-term action plan to work with diverse supplier. Determining financial impact and costs of diverse disadvantaged suppliers. Meaning quarterly cost reduction goals of the organization. So that one's going to be out. Now we're looking for a least, so it's got to be D. Yep, D it is. Okay. Summary. In addition to tracking KPIs and providing feedback to diverse suppliers, organizations frequently develop metrics for measuring their progress in implementing diverse supplier initiatives. U.S. government requirements for supplier diversity are laid out in subchapter D, socioeconomic programs, part 19 of the small business programs of the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Several organizations have expanded their definition of a diverse supplier to include any group of individuals that has been socially or economically disadvantaged by virtue of being a member group, not because of lack of capability. So, and it's up to the organization as to who they want as a diverse supplier and what their definitions for them are. All right, let's go find some questions. J4, there we go. Yeah, we only have 5 questions today, so go ahead and start working them. We'll go over answers in a few minutes. Okay, number 1 is Charlie. Number 2 is Delta. 3 is also Delta. 4 is Charlie. And 5 is Delta. All right, tomorrow we will start a new section, Section K.